Okay, this is a reaction video. This is from Diane Jennings. 10 European taboos we do not talk to Americans about. It gives me an impression that there's an entire continent that there are 10 taboos they don't that I don't know about. I don't know why you would keep that secret, but that's your call. But let me see what these are. Okay, 10 uh, cultural taboos. Let's see what they are. Please click like, share, and subscribe for Diane Jennings, and please click like, share, and subscribe for me. Let's see what's going on.
Gosh, you guys do celebrations well, and you do alcohol well. It didn't even occur to me that there was an alligator in there because that's not something I would come across. So today
Yes, I don't know how many alligators there are over in Europe. Maybe there are some. I don't know.
we're going to be touching on some things that are kind of serious issues, but I think it's important we acknowledge the serious things as well as the more fun things, so that if you do decide to go to Europe, you kind of know what's ahead of you. We may call some of these things the taboos. And isn't that a fun word? Taboo. Legitimately, I don't even know what she's talking about half the time. Before we get into today's video,
Neither do I.
be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Otherwise, you're going to get a piece of dirt under one of your nails, and you're not going to be able to get it out because it's going to be right under there, right in, under your nail. And also, yeah, I know, my nails are cute today. So like, share, comment, subscribe. It's all free. Okay, the first serious issue, okay, it's not really a serious issue, but I just thought I'd kick things off on a little bit of a lighter note, is rugby versus football.
Yes. Okay, let's rugby versus football. Let's see why would you not want to talk about that? They do play some rugby in the United States. They also play football in the United States. They call it soccer. Well,
Okay, Americans and Canadians would call football soccer, so I'm referring to soccer.
no, I call it football. You can call it football if you like.
There is a huge rivalry between the fans of the two sports, and I don't think Americans are kind of aware of that.
No, I wasn't aware of that.
This is not to say that a lot of people don't like both rugby and football. All the men in my family like rugby and football, but mostly prefer rugby. They'll sit down and watch a game of football, but it's not like a big deal. Just as much though as they are hardcore rugby aficionados, there are people who are crazy about football. The same way some people in the USA are crazy about American football or hockey in Canada. But whether you support rugby or football slash soccer is something of a thing in Europe. There is a lot of snobbery.
Now, I really wasn't aware of it, that there was an argument between rugby and football, that people that they didn't get along with each other. You know, there are people that like both and everything like that. But I wasn't aware of that.
Around whether you like rugby or football. I'm not saying it's justified, I'm just telling you what is going on. So rugby is often called the gentleman's sport, and
she has a quote there from Winston Churchill: "Just who first equipped football as a gentleman's game played by hooligans, and rugby as a hooligan's game played by gentlemen." Some sources attribute the quote to Britain's wartime minister Winston Churchill. Okay, so Winston Churchill made a quote that said, well, you heard it.
There are a lot of back things that make this make sense. Rugby is played in a lot of private schools. I remember when I was a kid, my dad was part of a program in Ireland because he was a rugby coach trying to bring rugby into some...
Now, they do play more football here in the United States. Now, they do play rugby in the United States, but I never played. Rugby wasn't an option when I was in high school and primary school and in high school and that sort of thing. It was never an option. But was it? I do know they play it in some places in the United States.
Some of the national schools, and it just didn't take. The kids there were not super interested. They were really good at rugby, but it just wasn't their thing. They were all into football. Football is also a lot more accessible across Europe. It's played in literally every field, every street. Everybody has accessibility to football and football coaching. Controversially, a lot of things involving rugby are more expensive. A lot of the merchandise, though, there can be some really expensive football slash soccer merchandise as well. But as I said, it's a lot of private schools that coach rugby, and that's where a little bit of the snobbery comes from. Also, there is a dark history on both sides, but most publicly people talk about football hooliganism. If you want to know More about this, check out my video over on the Diane Before Dawn channel about how the Liverpool supporters were wrongfully accused of being football hooligans. It's a
Well, but to be fair, if you go back and you look at Liverpool's past, they do have a history of being hooligans. I'm not saying they were hooligans in Paris, and I'm not saying that they were that this was that was correct. They've also been wrongfully accused before in the past as well, but they also have been correctly uh, accused of it as well. So there's I you know said I think what happened last year, the last Champions League final, I think they were that was poorly handled in Paris.
tiny percentage, but just like when there's a tiny percentage of anything, people get painted with the same brush. Over time, rugby versus football has become a big thing. It's one of those things similar to when you dislike the people who live in the next neighborhood just by way of the fact that they
I'm wondering why that's a taboo, but and keep in mind, Liverpool fans, I don't hate you guys. I mean, don't. I,
live in a different neighborhood. In fact, people have a lot more in common than on the surface of things, but it's just a thing in Europe, rugby versus football. The next taboo subject we're going to touch on is how a lot of police forces in Europe are unarmed. Most police forces, like in Ireland, have a tiny sector of armed police, but generally the people on the street are not armed. Here in Spain, a lot of the police are armed, but some of them are not. And this is something that a lot of people in the USA find difficult to understand, and it comes back to the fact that
I don't
there
find
are
it
just
too.
not a
I
lot.
don't find it too difficult to understand. I've heard about that before. Now, to be fair, when I was in Germany and I was getting ready to board a plane, head back to the United States, I was frisked by a soldier with an AK-47. So I mean, I did see weapons over there, but that's not, I have known that they don't carry guns, and I think that's fine. I think that's a I mean, I don't know. Again, I don't know why these are taboos, why they wouldn't talk about these things, but I don't have a problem with that. That's the country's decision.
Of guns out there in society, so it's not something police have to deal with often. I'm not here to argue about guns, but I am here to just say that it's just not as big of a factor in Europe. There's not as much accessibility, and so it's not something the police have to deal with a lot. Therefore, they have to up their skill sets in other areas, like one-to-one combat, or hitting people with a truncheon, or electrocuting them. At the end of the day, if you're dead, you're dead. But just guns, they're not a big thing in police forces around Europe. They are not as much a staple of the police forces in Europe. A lot of them have them, like here in Spain, as I said, but they are not like the go-to thing. The third thing that I want to talk about is why we tip in Europe. We do tip in Europe. Sometimes I see lists from Americans come out that say people in Europe don't tip. We do tip, actually. Like, tipping is part of the etiquette at times, but tipping is part of
It's just a different thing in Europe than it is in America.
saying somebody did an exceptional job. You don't just tip all the time. People I would tip on the regular would be people like my
Yeah, as I understand it, in Europe, you don't always tip, or some of the things is because in the United States, that's where most of the waiters and waitresses make their money is from tips, and it's something that you normally do. You always leave 20% tip, whether it was a great service or not, because that's just what you do. That's built into our mainframe. In Europe, it's little bit different. That's understandable.
beautician, Chewy's groomer, anybody who does my hair. That's me saying you did an exceptional job. I'm really happy with your service. Other times I will tip is if I go out for like a big dinner. Generally speaking, you're going to tip if you go out for dinner. You won't tip if you go to a cafe and have like a sandwich and a drink. You could, but it's not the norm. But I will tip if I go out for a 3-course meal and the service is good. In Ireland, generally we'll tip about 10%, whereas here in Spain, it's like a couple of coins, just a little bit of whatever you have handy. Tipping in Europe is a compliment. It is something that you should do in certain scenarios, but it's not something that we do all the time.
And like I said, it's built into our mainframe to tip everywhere we go. In fact, we went to a dinner with my parents and my brother and his wife and my girlfriend, and my we think the waitress forgot to put in my brother's meal. He didn't get his meal till we would already finished ours. He said, "Go ahead and eat," and we did. And, when she eventually brought it out, and he got his food and he enjoyed it. It was very good, but it was clear that she forgot to take his order or put his order in, and he had to wait while we all ate. And we still, my dad still gave a pretty good tip for the waitress, even though she messed up my brother's order or didn't put it in. That's just something that we do.
It's not demanded of us like it is in America. The next thing is that dining can last a couple of hours. I know on paper we're aware of the fact that people in Europe take longer to eat a full meal, but I've even gone to some places and had people from different cultures take a really long time. So on Christmas Day, we will sit over our dinner for like 4 or 5 hours. That is the norm in a lot of cultures in Europe. In stark contrast, when I go to America, my plate is taken away. My suggestion is if you're
And that can happen in the United States too. Okay, it depends on if you go to a restaurant. I mean, I've been to restaurants with my family, and we were there for maybe an hour after the meal. Maybe not that long, maybe half hour after the meal. But if we're eating it at home or leaving at my parents' house, it'll be 1 or 2 hours that we're all sitting at the table. Sometimes maybe three. Sometimes we'll get up and go to like a porch, continue the conversation out there. But I don't think I've ever been to a situation where we went to a meal and we were there for 4 hours. I've never had that experience.
invited to somebody's house in Europe for dinner is have a light snack before you get there because you just don't know how long you're going to be waiting. The next thing that Americans find it difficult to understand is the relationship Europeans have with alcohol. Now, I've heard a lot of you guys say that you're big drinkers, especially in parts of Middle America. I've heard you guys.
Well, I mean, I saw a lot of people doing a lot of drinking when I was over there in Europe, but no more than I saw in the United States. I certainly wouldn't say that Europeans drink a lot more than the United States. I could be wrong on that, but I mean, one of the only differences that I saw is in the United States, you can't carry like if I bought a uh, some beer and I had a bottle of beer and I'm just standing out there talking with my friends, drinking my beer out in public, I can't do that. That's called it's an open container. You can't, but in Europe you can do that.
Guys talk about how it's part of your culture there to drink, and gosh, you guys do celebrations well, and you do alcohol well. However, in parts of Europe, drinking is just the norm. It's a normal thing. You will let children have a glass of wine at dinner in certain countries. We're not getting the kids absolutely pissed or anything.
Nobody's accusing you of that. Okay, I mean, if you let kids have wine at the dinner table, you let kids have wine at the dinner table. That's your call. Nobody's gonna. I mean, look, again, it's not something you're gonna do in the United States. If my my mom pours a glass of wine, I'm at a restaurant. Here's your wine, son. And when I was a little boy, that would have been a problem. But no, if cultures have their way of doing have wine, kids drink wine. Hey, that's their call.
It's just like after maybe the age of 10, you'd say, oh, do you want a little glass of shandy or something with your meal? It's not something we do in Ireland. In Ireland, the culture tends to be a lot more binge drinking from about the age of 14. But also in Ireland, we drink to celebrate and we drink to mourn. We drink just for funsies.
They didn't serve pints! Oh! Only buckets!
I think the biggest difference I would highlight in relation to alcohol is in America, you get a lot of people coming out saying that they are alcoholics. I've said it before in relation to Ireland, you don't get a lot of people saying they're alcoholics. You'll say somebody has a problem with drinking, and then they will generally cut that out by themselves. There are groups and organizations that deal with alcoholism, but it's something I think people are a lot slower to get to than they are in America. Similarly, I haven't heard of any alcoholic groups in France or Spain or Italy. I'm sure they exist, but it's just not something that is very much the norm as it is acknowledged in America. The next thing that is kind of interesting to
I don't drink a lot of alcohol, so I have no points really on that. I really don't. But I know a lot of people who do, and yeah, it's something that I've always avoided.
touch on is the fact that throughout Europe we don't have as many scary animals or
Yeah, I mean, and to be fair, the scary animals. I know we have like different bears roam free and some of our wildcats. We have alligators down in Florida and that sort of thing. But I've never really encountered any of those things. I've never really had trouble with scary animals.
Bugs or birds as you do in America. So things like, for example, when I was in Florida and it was like midnight and I was going across a lake in a canoe, it didn't even occur to me that there was an alligator in there because that's not something I would come across. Different places in Europe have different things.
Yeah, I guess if you're in Europe and you're going across a pond or going across a lake or something like that, you're not really too worried about an alligator. But an alligator generally is afraid of humans. It's not gonna just you're not you're not necessarily on the dinner menu. Not like not like excuse me, not like a saltwater crocodile or something like that. You're generally not on the dinner menu for an alligator. If you don't bug them, they won't bug you.
But mostly, I think America, you have it pretty bad when it comes to scary, dangerous animals and bugs. Camping is pretty
Bugs, yet I have encountered a lot of bugs.
cushy here. All you have to really fear is the people. The next thing I want to talk about that a lot of Europeans avoid is subtext. A lot of Europeans don't say this directly, ironically, to American people. And of course, it's a very subjective thing. Some people are really good at reading between the lines of what somebody's saying, and some people are not. However, the difference in Europe is that culturally, it's the norm to dance around certain subjects or to be delicate, whereas in America, being very forthright is mostly.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. There are Americans who will bounce around the subject, okay? And it's just something that it depends on the individual. There are individuals who will just, have no filter, will just go right through and say what they think, whether it bugs you or not. But there are a lot of people who will bounce around the subject to avoid it because they don't want to offend anybody. And generally, what you have in a situation like that is you'll say, "Hey, no, okay, you can say what you want. You're not offending me, I promise." And then you can have that conversation. But Americans generally that I've encountered don't necessarily always go for the go directly in and without any filter.
Applauded. I've often given the Irish norm of being offered a drink a couple of times in somebody's house, a cup of tea, for example. If anyone's seen Father Ted, there's that joke where you're offered it 3 times before you accept.
Will you not have a cup of tea, Bishop Lennon?
No.
That's not like a rule, it's just most people will say no a couple of times in Ireland. It's not a hard and fast rule, it's just kind of something that happens. However, that could be seen as an analogy for a greater scope of things within Europe. We tend to just be a little bit more delicate when we're coming at people with something, whereas I find Americans will just say it straight at you. The next one is surrounding black people in Europe. Now, obviously, I am not a black person. I am sometimes a blue person, and I am sometimes an orange patchy person. I can't speak on anyone's behalf, I can just speak around my understanding and experiences of this. So when I was in the USA, I was referring to one of my friends who is Irish and black. And I was corrected by this person who said African American.
See, the thing about African American, I mean, think about this for a second, okay? What's her name? Charlize Theron. She's from South Africa, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. If she were to marry a guy from the United States, okay, have a child with him, wouldn't that child technically be half African American? I mean, no. In the United States, we have something called political correctness, and that's what she's talking about there. Okay. And look, I have nothing against political correctness, and I'm not going to sit here and say that. Look, I generally, if I'm talking to an individual who has different ethnicity, I call them by their first name. If I describe them, I generally describe them by what they're wearing, not by the color of their skin. Okay, I've never really had that issue. But what they're talking about is African. Does that make an African Englishman, African Frenchman? I mean, you can call them what you want, but I generally don't tend to use the word African American a whole lot. Not because I don't agree with the term or don't like the term. It's just that I generally like to call people by their first name, and I want to describe them, I'll just tell them what color clothes they're wearing. I try to avoid that at all costs because I don't not a fan of talking about somebody's ethnicity. I may have done it in the past before. I may have even done it on some of these videos, but generally I don't do that. It's not something I do a whole lot. On occasion I probably have, but I generally don't do that.
And I didn't even know how to reply. My friend is Irish, they happen to be black, and they've never been to Africa or America in their life.
Yeah, and that's the point. I mean, you're calling it somebody African American, or yeah, they've never been to Africa. They don't have African values. Now, I worked with a guy at work who was from Africa. He was from Ghana, and we talked an awful lot. But I never referred to him. I always call him his first name. But yeah, yeah, he lives in the United States. Is it now? He's the African American. No, he's not African American. He's African. I mean, it's something that I don't have a problem with, but it's something that makes me, every now and then when I sit back as a Hispanic American, when I sit back and I think about it, I go, why do we use that term? Because there's nothing about them that says Africa. They've never been to Africa. Okay, so why do we need to call them African American? Why don't we just call them Bob or John or Phil or whatever their name is? It's just in my opinion.
So generally speaking, if somebody is born in Ireland, they're just called Irish. You're an Irish person. Now you might have African
Or even just call them American. Use the American guy over there in the blue shirt.
heritage or ancestry, in the same way that you might have Italian heritage or ancestry. And that might be a culture that you celebrate within your house.
And you get that a lot too. You get Hispanic Americans, Irish Americans, things like that. But that comes from something called political correctness.
There are even growing parts of society that allow people to embrace their culture more throughout Europe. But generally speaking, that person is known as Irish, and they are, in a separate sentence, a black person. Some people have asked me about the black Irish. This does not refer to people who are Irish and black. Generally, the black Irish was a term for people outside of Ireland who were Irish outside of Ireland, and they had dark hair and dark eyes. And generally this was attributed to the Spanish sailors coming into Ireland. I don't know if there's any confirmation about where they come from, but that's what is referred to when talking about the black Irish. Individuals might choose to refer to themselves in a different way, but generally speaking throughout Europe, if you are born in Italy, you are Italian.
Yeah, I can understand this taboo. It's something that, like I said, mentioned political correctness. But yeah, I mean, I don't really know if I agree with the term African American, but it's just something that's caught on. It's something that a lot of people use, and it's generally meant to be a nice, because slang back in the day in the United States, it used to be the N word, then another version of the N word, and then black. Okay, and now it's African American. And I think that's going to stick around for a long time. So and most people generally aren't too offended by the term black, but it's generally nicer to use the term African American or to describe them if you're going to use the ethnic root. Like I said, I generally tend to call them by their first name. Okay, that's the way I've always done it. Call them by your first name, and if you want to describe them, that's Bob. That's Bob over there. Which one is Bob? Bob's the guy wearing the blue shirt. Okay, hopefully they're not all wearing blue shirts. I have to describe something else. He's wearing the red tennis shoes, or he's wearing whatever he's wearing. But if I have to, I have to. But for the most part, you try and avoid. I always try and avoid using the ethnic term. But she's right.
And you are
That is
whatever
a taboo.
ethnicity. Additionally, the next thing that is hard to explain sometimes to Americans is giving directions. Generally speaking, it is really
Well, you generally don't have to give directions anymore now that we have GPS on our phones and things like that. But
easy in America.
and really most guys don't like to ask for directions. Well, let me see what she says.
To give directions because your country is so new. Everything is laid out in blocks, so you just go, you go up 3 blocks and then you turn left, go for 5 blocks and then you turn right, and it's right there. Whereas in Europe, everything is just laid out all higgledy-piggledy because it's an older place. There are parts of Europe that are more modernized, of course, and then I guess you could say blocks, but it's not something that you hear very often. It's really hard to give directions in Europe because everything goes all over the place. And
That is true. When I was in Germany, like I said, it was a lot of places were all over the place, but wasn't too difficult.
final thing that is sometimes a little taboo for Europeans to tell American people is that we know more about the USA than you know about our living situation.
Oh, I'm not of that. I have no doubt in my mind. I would never. I would say more people. Look. People, Europeans know more about the USA than the other way around. That I have no doubt. Most people don't know anything about Europe. Uh, I've done videos on things like that. What people don't know about Europe, what people don't know about the rest of the world, like not knowing that they have the internet in Brazil, and not knowing that certain things in Australia and things like that. Um, but I have no doubt in my mind. Look, I know quite a bit about Europe because I read a lot about it, and I've been there. Like I said, I've been to Germany. Uh, I do know things about England, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, the Iberian Peninsula, that area. I've never been there, but I would like to go there. Italy. I know quite a bit about Europe, but the most Americans, and it really comes from where we live and the area that we live. We don't. It's so far to get to Europe for all intents and purposes. So I have no doubt in my mind about this one.
In Europe. And that's not meant to be rude or anything. I've actually learned a lot about that through the comments and talking to you.
And it seems like there's a lot of Europeans that really want to visit the United States, that want to see the United States. And I don't think it's really, I mean, there are people who really would like to see Europe, but generally don't. I'm sure there's a heck of a lot more people in Europe who have visited the United States than people in the United States that have visited Europe. And a lot of that has to do with the fact of the things that you can do in the United States. There's so many things that look. I've been living in the United States all my life, and there's still some things that I haven't done. There's just so much stuff to do here, and not that there's not anything to do in Europe. Like most of our country's also so big, and in Europe, a lot of I mean, everything is if you're in France, you can go to Germany, you can go to Belgium, you can go to Switzerland. Okay, you can go to Spain. I mean, you can cross the border very easily to a number of different countries. Things that you really can't do in the United States. You can only go up Canada or go south to Mexico. And for some people, like somebody in Ohio, it's about 5 or 6 hours probably to drive to someplace to get to Canada. And certainly, if you want to drive down to Mexico, certainly that's probably a 2-day drive just to get to the border.
You guys directly. For example, in Europe, the education system has an entire section of our history lessons devoted to world history. And yes, America and Canada get their own chapters. Additionally, we are fed a lot of media and movies from the United States of America, so we know a lot more about the USA than you would about.
But if you're getting your information from the movies, you're getting the wrong information. Let me just put it that way. But what you mentioned about world history, yeah, we have world history too. But most of world history, we're your ancestors. A lot of the Irish, the Italians, the Germans, the English, whoever you want to talk to, came to America, founded this country, and built. Now we have our own culture that way. But if people from America went and found it, might be different. But no, this is not shocking at all.
Films made in the USA about parts of Europe. They're seen through the lens of American people. And of course, movies are just movies, but it still advises you on things that are kind of the norm over there, rather than what you see on screen, especially sometimes about places like Ireland. They're very stereotypical. Additionally, the chances are we have family in America and Canada. We will have people who emigrated over there and can come back and tell us firsthand what things are like. On top of that, a lot of Europeans vacation in the United States of America, whereas Americans, understandably, a lot of them don't even have passports to leave the United States. That being said, I think we can always learn more stuff about each other and how things work in different cultures, and that's something I'm open to. Let me know below in the comments if there's anything that surprises you in this list. Shout out today to a couple of very special people.
Bye, everybody.
No, none of this surprises me. Uh, Look, my girlfriend would love to go to Ireland. She's Irish uh, from birth. Her descendants. She's descended from people who are Irish. Her last name is Murphy. Um, but yeah, a lot of these aren't really. I don't consider these taboos, or maybe the one about ethnicity. But no, this was very interesting. I think we should learn about each other, learn different things. I know a lot of people want to come, but I've always said to people who want to come to the United States, don't think going to New York City or going to Los Angeles or Chicago or places like that will teach you about America. If you want to know about America, you need to go to places which are distinctly American, like Kansas City, like I think like places in West Virginia, Kentucky, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania. You go out west, Denver is a good place. South Dakota, anywhere in South Dakota, beautiful, beautiful country. Wyoming, Montana. There are a lot better places to go to than just because most people. I went to America. I was in New York. New York City is a very multi ethnic, multicultural, multi everything. Okay, there's all different races, different creeds. It's not and a lot of foreigners live there. So it's almost like a melting pot of different nationalities in one spot, but not a lot of them are American. Some of them are American, but a good portion of them are from other countries. Uh, People that are just born, bred United States all the way through. And this is nothing against New York City, Chicago, or LA for that matter, because they're all great places. I've been to all three of them. It's just that if you want to get the true American experience with Americans who are born and bred and speak like me, or maybe with a twang or something like that, yeah, the places I mentioned are places you need to go to. But still, I enjoyed this. 10 European taboos we not talk to Americans about. Diane Jennings, please click like, share, and subscribe for her. And please click like, share, and subscribe for me. Have a good rest of your day, and thanks for watching.